Well, good evening, and thank you all very much for attending, for the kind introduction and the warm welcome. And I'd like to add my thanks to the sponsors of this evening's event. Mediation is a critical tool as we face the dual challenges of expanding our business in a global environment and an ever-present focus on keeping risks and costs under control. For this reason, it's my belief that GE cannot afford not to use mediation. By sharing GE's practical experiences and perspective on mediation with you this evening, I hope to provide an example and maybe some small measure of inspiration to other companies and their counsel on why they should adopt or at least try mediation. This evening, I will address GE's experiences with mediation, tell you a little bit about where we are today with mediation and how we got here, and how we really came to adopt it as a regular, not just occasional tool, but really preference in our formal early dispute resolution processes. I'll also share our views on the exciting developments that are taking place here in Singapore and elsewhere in the world of ADR policymaking. GE has embraced mediation as part of what we at GE have coined as early dispute resolution, or EDR. It's quite a formal program. It's been in existence for nearly 20 years. In fact, 2015 will mark the 20th anniversary of the implementation of GE's EDR program, which was initially adopted in 1995. Although we've continued to refine our approach to early dispute resolution during that period of time, our fundamental commitment to EDR and the use of early mediation to drive the early evaluation and resolution of conflicts has only grown stronger. Let me talk briefly about why GE, as a globally successful company, so strongly embraces the merits of mediation. Why GE sees mediation and early dispute resolution less as a tool for dispute resolution, one among many tools in the lawyer's toolkit, and more as a critical business approach for operating a successful commercial enterprise. General Electric is a truly global company, in existence for well over 100 years, with 305,000 employees operating in more than 170 countries around the world, divided across 8 major business lines. Last year, GE earned $146 billion in annual revenue, and more than half of that revenue was earned outside the United States. $25 billion, or nearly 20% of our annual revenue, was earned in Asia, figures which have doubled over the last 10 years, and which we expect to continue to grow as an overall percentage of our turnover. And we are committed to success here in Singapore, in Asia more broadly, and everywhere else in the world in which we operate. But in every business, disputes will arise. Conflicts are an unavoidable feature of doing business, and never more so than in a global environment. That's simply a natural outgrowth of the relationships among parties that at times may have differing commercial goals or encounter unexpected difficulties. In a business as large and diverse as ours, we certainly have our fair share of disputes, and disputes and litigation left unresolved impose real risks and costs on any business. The most obvious is the direct financial cost, the fees that are paid to external lawyers, experts, and other providers of litigation support. What we spend on legal fees and other litigation expenses are profits that will never be delivered to our shareholders or reinvested in growing the business. Uncertainty about the outcome of a contractual dispute, or intellectual property rights, or claims associated with a particular large project may delay the company from moving forward with its business strategy while the litigation is pending, resulting in lost opportunity costs. Litigation can also serve as a very significant distraction to employees and executives of the business, resources that are much better focused on growing the company and creating value for our customers and our shareholders. Perhaps most important is the adverse effect that disputes and litigation unquestionably have on business relationships, Relationships that in a large business organization like ours that is largely B2B rather than consumer-facing, relationships with customers, suppliers, joint venture partners, and so on, they can result in lost business opportunities for both parties to the disputes. In any successful commercial enterprise, business relationships are critical, and they're as easy to lose as they are costly to develop and maintain. Litigation, in general, does not build relationships. It destroys the value associated with them. It can also have a serious negative impact on a company's reputation. In short, winning cases is not the same as winning in business. Successful businesses like ours want disputes resolved as quickly as possible with reasonable outcomes, so that the business can avoid wasting money on unproductive conflict, can preserve and grow those valuable business relationships I was referring to a moment ago, minimize the reputational risk, and keep employees and other resources focused on innovation, customers, and winning in the marketplace. Of course, when disputes arise, the first resort will almost always be direct discussions and negotiations between business representatives. That's the way it should be. That's the way business is and always has been conducted. But we all know that there are times when the parties cannot reach resolution through direct negotiation. Sometimes emotions run high and interfere with rational decision-making. Sometimes parties are unwilling to share their real negotiating position with the other side, making it difficult to identify the areas where there might be some commonality and a deal is possible to reach. Sometimes they're unwilling to be too forward in suggesting a possible settlement, lest they be perceived as weak. Sometimes they have an inaccurate or unrealistic view of the strengths and weaknesses of their case. It's not uncommon for GE, as I'll explain in a little while, to have a serious imbalance between itself and the party across the table from it in terms of how much real understanding and awareness the parties have about the details of their case. And then sometimes there are cultural barriers and expectations that can interfere with direct negotiations. Competent mediators can often bridge those gaps and allow parties to find room for agreement that they were unable to identify themselves. They can privately assess each side's interests and identify potential areas of compromise without either party feeling like their position is being disclosed to the other side. A good mediator will also allow each side to obtain a better perspective on the position of the other party, help you to place yourself in the shoes of your opponent and they in your shoes, and can provide a bit of a reality check on the perceived strength or reasonableness of one's own position, either in terms of legal issues that may be in dispute or factual issues that may be in dispute. A mediator that is steeped in the cultures of the respective parties also may be able to bridge differences in cultural expectations or communications patterns that were dividing the parties. As the authors note in the well-regarded text, An Asian Perspective on Mediation, the flexibility of mediation allows mediators to use different approaches to account for cultural differences, and even for the mediator to educate each side on the cultural expectations and norms of the other, and to soften the impact of any unintended slights, misconceptions, or differences in style and approach. And in cultures where preserving face and social harmony are important values, the benefits of mediation are even more obvious and compelling. Parties can also achieve business solutions in mediation that simply cannot be obtained in litigation, no matter what. Litigation can only produce a winner and a loser, sometimes two losers, based on a determination of past events. It cannot result in creative or business-oriented solutions that look forward and serve to renew, deepen, or restructure business relationships. Mediation, by contrast, is not limited in the number of winners that it can produce, nor the creativity that may be brought to bear to resolve disputes and try to create those situations where everyone gets something of value out of the process and walks away at least content, if not happy. Mediation also provides a healthy avenue for achieving a rational and timely resolution in jurisdictions where judicial processes may be exceedingly slow or unreliable, or where one may otherwise be uncomfortable with the local judicial process. The mediator likewise can shape the process in the manner that he or she thinks is best calculated to achieve success. Don't judge the merits of mediation based on the results of one or two failed attempts. In all of my years in private practice, in large part because of the kinds of litigation I was involved in, I was really only involved actively in mediation twice, and neither one was successful. And yet I'm standing before you tonight to really urge mediation on you as a regular part of your dispute resolution practice. There are many, many reasons why a mediation may not succeed, or succeed on the first try anyway. This is not altogether uncommon, as ultimately any successful resolution is purely voluntary and requires two willing participants. And indeed, an initial lack of familiarity and comfort with the process itself, with mediation, may act as an impediment, and in our experience often does if you have a party on the other side that is not accustomed to mediating. But as you become more familiar with the process, you'll find that you're able to shape it in a way that drives the process to acceptable outcomes and that are far preferable to years of time and money wasted on litigation. Our litigators, in short, through long experience all across the world in a diverse array of disputes, believe in the value of mediation. And in an era of relentless cost pressure, how could they not? Even mediations that do not succeed or succeed immediately are often valuable exercises. They can serve to renew dialogue that has broken down, dialogue which may lead to a settlement or renewed mediation at a later time. And in the course of any mediation, both sides will inevitably learn new information about the other side's position and perspective that can inform fair litigation or dispute resolution on the merits. The Singapore Mediation Center has been surveying participants in its mediations, both clients and counsel, since its inception in 1997. The SMC has been a pioneer in the use of surveying to assess user satisfaction with its services, a practice that we highly commend and wish were adopted more globally by other providers. Over 90% of participants who used the process indicated they would recommend mediation to others. More than 80% reported saving both time and money in the process. But perhaps most interestingly, more than 50% of the respondents who did not settle nonetheless reported saving time and money using mediation. Mediation requires only a small commitment of time, which is minimal compared to the time and resources required to litigate a dispute to conclusion. A willingness to mediate is not a sign of weakness. To the contrary, it shows respect for your business partner, that you value the other side's views and the relationship, that you're willing to listen and to engage in a principled dialogue rooted in the facts, law, and a clear-eyed appraisal of probabilities that's designed to find a solution that meets both of your needs. It's aimed at restoring harmony rather than perpetuating conflict. And mediation poses typically little or no downside risk. It's entirely voluntary, and any resolution can be reached only with the consent of both parties. You need to divulge only that information and those arguments and positions you choose to share, either to the mediator or to the other side. Given the challenges we face as commercial enterprises in an increasingly competitive world, a successful business can no longer afford any tool that may advance its broader commercial objectives and reduce its overall portfolio of active disputes. As litigation began to spiral upward in the United States, GE began to seek relief from that pain. The GE legal team in particular came to appreciate that winning lawsuits was not always the same as delivering the best overall value to our internal clients and, most importantly, ultimately, to our shareholders. We found that a more systematic approach to dispute resolution was required, an approach that focused on resolving disputes more quickly and at the earliest possible time that could achieve a reasonable outcome, thereby minimizing not only our outside legal spend, but more importantly, the damage to our business relationships, the distraction of our key personnel and resources, and the commercial uncertainty that litigation entails. So in response to this growing understanding of the real costs of litigation, GE adopted what we refer to as our Early Dispute Resolution Program, or our EDR program. GE's EDR program entails a systematic analysis of every material dispute at the very earliest stage of its development, and then a process that the team anticipates will drive an acceptable resolution at the earliest possible time. This is conscious strategy, and often this entails the use of mediation. At GE, early dispute resolution starts with what we call an early case assessment, or, of course, you can all say it with me, an ECR. Regular case reviews at all levels within the company routinely focus on an early assessment of the matter and identification of possible opportunities for early resolution. This ECA process encourages the legal team to carefully assess not only the legal risks, but also the commercial risks that the dispute poses, and to consider creative approaches or solutions that might be used to achieve an early resolution of the dispute. Legal problems are fundamentally business problems, and the ECA process thereby serves the additional purpose of driving early alignment between our legal strategy and the client's business objectives. The fundamental objective of the early case assessment is to facilitate informed decision-making and to identify potential opportunities to resolve disputes as soon as possible. Quite often we find that mediation is the best means for determining whether an early resolution is feasible. Now, mediation and early dispute resolution are not appropriate in every case. As I noted before, some disputes must be fought to conclusion. But those instances are actually rare. So overcoming resistance or skepticism or wariness on the part of the other party is an important challenge and an important objective for us to have in mind as we try to deploy mediation. Within GE, we've begun to move towards more standardization of our contracts around the world. Almost all of our businesses today prefer to include a mandatory mediation requirement before arbitration or litigation in our commercial contracts. Now, it's not always achievable, but it's a goal for most of GE's businesses in most of our commercial negotiations. You may ask, why bother including this as a contractual requirement? While it is true that you do not need a pre-existing requirement in order to attempt mediation, my colleagues in the various GE businesses have discovered, independently of each other for the most part, that in most countries it's difficult to get to mediation without this. In other words, this is a tool for overcoming some of that resistance or wariness that I spoke about a moment ago. Once a dispute arises, the parties, and in particular the lawyers who represent them, may feel that agreeing to mediate is a sign of weakness or just a waste of time, or they may be unfamiliar with and therefore unduly wary of the process. But a contractual requirement to mediate will usually overcome this reluctance. The trend within GE to ensure that mediation is actually used in our disputes is consistent with a global trend we're seeing in many countries. In Europe, for example, we've seen over the past decade a mediation directive come into existence, and mediation has been suggested as a means of collective redress so that multiple claims and claimants can be joined together to obtain compensation for similar injuries via this cooperative mechanism. GE has participated through the International Mediation Institute, IMI, in numerous initiatives to promote mediation. One of the most recent and most interesting, which is really still developing and ongoing, it's at a very early stage, is the proposal advanced this past summer within the United Nations Commission on Trade Law for an international convention on the cross-border enforcement of mediated settlement agreements. This proposal is now being explored by UNCITRAL. We're excited about this, and it reflects the energies being devoted to making mediation a preferred feature of dispute resolution. Making it easier to enforce mediated settlements will inevitably increase the use of mediation, and more mediations will result in more settlements. And this, without question, will benefit GE and other companies that are actively engaged in international commerce. All of this brings me now to the recommendations published last December by the International Commercial Mediation Working Group that was set up by Chief Justice Menon. The Chief Justice had the vision to charge the working group with proposing ways to develop Singapore into a world center for international commercial mediation, to address the needs of the increasing number and complexity of cross-border disputes. Two of its recommendations in particular present opportunities to translate the Chief Justice's vision into quick action. The first is the focus on quality standards in mediation by creating a new professional body for mediation to set transparent and credible standards and to credential mediators meeting those standards. So I applaud the working group's recommendation, which I understand will result in the launch of the Singapore International Mediation Institute, or SIMI, in early November. And I'm especially proud of the fact that GE has at least indirectly made its own contribution toward this initiative. I understand that SIMI is drawing some of its quality and transparency inspiration as well as ethical standards from the International Mediation Institute, or IMI, the support whereof I described a little bit earlier. GE was one of the founding members of IMI, in fact, and the GE Foundation has provided significant financial contributions to IMI. The second action is the simultaneous establishment of an international mediation service provider, the Singapore International Mediation Center, or SIMC, with a diverse, high-quality panel of international mediators. Also interesting are the novel proposals in the working group's report, for example, that SIMC would offer the services of a designating authority of mediators for parties in dispute, the ability to provide the names of top mediators for deal-making, post-merger facilitation, or even the design of dispute resolution processes for companies. Today, it is accepted in the world of business that for arbitration, Singapore is a premier location due to the efforts of both the judiciary and the Singapore International Arbitration Center. From a user perspective, I want to emphasize how refreshing it is to see similar drive and enthusiasm now being invested into quality mediation alongside excellence in arbitration. SIMI and SIMC will together not only increase the confidence of users in mediation, and therefore the popularity of mediation, but will also increase the popularity of Singaporean arbitration. By offering thoughtful, highly evolved, and well-supported services in both areas, Singapore will be looking at growth in international dispute resolution from the user's perspective, with mediation and arbitration as complementary tools, not in conflict with one another. This is exactly what companies need if we are to grow internationally and accept commercial risks without worrying about overly expensive or debilitating litigation risks or costs. I sincerely hope that other jurisdictions will follow the Singapore model. In closing, let me say that GE is, and I personally am, proud to be a small part of the vision and action that Singapore exhibits in this vital area and the leadership that it's currently showing in this area. And we hope that other countries in Southeast Asia and much further afield will judge that the time has come to follow suit. Thank you very much for your time and attention this afternoon, and I look forward to continuing the discussion with you all.